Time now for business with Kate Moody. Kate, good to see you again.
Hi, Monty.
So it's been 5 years since British voters decided to leave the EU, and it remains a pretty divisive move, especially among business owners.
Yeah, well, since the start of the year, they've really been struggling to adapt their business models, catch up to the new paperwork and bureaucracy that is required. Brexit did become official in January 2020, but negotiations carried on during the so-called transition period last year, and the concrete impact has only been felt for the past 6 months. Jean-Emile Jamin has more.
5 years on from the UK's slim majority decision to leave the European Union, and the wounds have yet to heal. But Prime Minister Boris Johnson has remained upbeat, continuing to promote the benefits of a new post-Brexit Britain.
It has given us the freedom to establish 8 free ports across the country, driving new investment, to develop the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, to protect and invest in jobs and renewal across every part of the UK.
For many, though, the distraction of the pandemic has masked the economic fallout caused by the referendum. British trade collapsed with the EU at the start of this year as exports dropped by 20%. Trade deal talks with the EU and 68 other countries have continued, coupled with a $9 trillion negotiation to join the Pacific Trade Area. But for the first time in generations, Britons no longer have unrestricted entry to the continent, potentially impacting on the labour force and the tourism sector.
Things like visas, where we didn't need it before for Europe, it's just annoying to us.
Many businesses have also been forced to either focus on growing local revenue streams or move their bases to Europe entirely. For small British enterprises, a shortage of seasonal workers, increased delivery costs, export tariffs and administrative red tape have added to the headache.
It's a minefield, really, to try and move goods through from the UK into Europe, and expensive and resource-heavy, bureaucracy-heavy, all the things that you really don't want as a business.
As of yet, it's unclear whether any economic issues are just teething problems or more long-lasting, with much depending on any new bilateral agreements the UK can muster in the time to come.
France is the latest EU member state to get the green light for its COVID recovery funds. 40 billion euros, that's a key part of the French government's 100 billion euro stimulus plan. European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen has been touring the bloc as she announces approval for the spending plans in person. 24 of the 27 member states have submitted requests so far, Estonia just last week. Along the way, she's been using and highlighting the EU's digital health certificate, that so-called COVID passport. Italy, Germany, Spain and Portugal are among the 12 countries to have had their funding proposals approved. French President Emmanuel Macron said the fund was a symbol of European unity.
Notre priorité aujourd'hui, c'est d'abord de continuer à sortir de la pandémie. Et je veux ici vraiment défendre le travail que nous avons aussi conduit en européen, défendre votre travail et celui auprès de vous des commissaires les plus impliqués pour la vaccination européenne. L'Europe est en train de réussir sa vaccination. Elle continue à avancer à marche forcée par une politique d'achat conjointe, par aussi une politique maintenant de recherche et d'innovation conjointe que nous avons décidé pour l'avenir.
Well, France has earmarked more than half of its 40 billion euros for green investments, about 5.8 billion to improve energy efficiency, 6.5 billion for less polluting public transport and infrastructure, and 5 billion to develop green or sustainable energy sources. The EU is requiring a minimum of 37% of its funds be used for the so-called green transition. The French plan also outlines a quarter of the money, or 10 billion euros, for digital investments. Again, that's slightly higher than the EU-mandated threshold. Authorities hope that will create more jobs and a more resilient, sustainable economy. France and other member states are set to start receiving money in the coming weeks, about 30% in the first round, with more to follow in the second half of the year. Argentina has reached a deal with its international creditors to avoid defaulting on about $2.4 billion worth of debt repayment when a grace period would have expired at the end of July. Instead, it will pay a fraction of that amount in the short term and the rest later on. Catherine Viette has more.
A sigh of relief in Buenos Aires after the government negotiated a deal to avoid defaulting on its debt repayment. Argentina was expected to pay $2.4 billion by the end of July, but now it will pay just $430 million, with the rest to come later. The country's economy minister praised the deal.
Paying that amount would have been a blow to our international reserves and therefore would have generated more exchange rate instability and more macroeconomic instability in general.
Argentina will now have until March to repay the remainder of the debt to the so-called Paris Club of Creditors, which includes the U.S., Germany, Japan, and France. This follows last year's successful restructuring of some $65 billion in debt owed to private creditors. The deal will provide some breathing room for the country's struggling economy, which has been in a recession since 2018, a situation only made worse by the coronavirus pandemic. Last year, GDP fell nearly 10%, and annual inflation is running at almost 49%. Meanwhile, Argentina is still in talks with the International Monetary Fund about repaying the $45 billion it was loaned under the previous government in 2018.
The investment bank Morgan Stanley has told staff and clients they won't be allowed to enter its New York offices until they are fully vaccinated. Employees who are not fully immunized will have to work remotely. This new policy will come into effect next month. In return, some COVID restrictions currently in place will be lifted, like the requirement to wear masks indoors. JP Morgan, meanwhile, is instructing its staff to report their vaccine status in an effort to reassure workers that it is indeed safe to come back to the office. This all taking place during a growing debate in the finance world about the ideal balance of working from home and coming back to the office, and under what conditions, as the pandemic, of course, remains very much part of life.
Yeah, I think regardless, people will be working from home in a lot of instances going forward.
Yeah, look, we're looking at this sort of hybrid model going forward. But some people, including a lot of banks, are requiring that people come in more often anyway.
Okay, Kate Moody, thanks so much. That's it for now. Stay tuned for more world news coming up here on France 24.